Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AFOA Canada's 5th live webinar in the series, The Evolving Indigenous Workplace, Defining a New Normal, where we're sharing resources and information that can help you navigate through the ever-changing events around COVID-19. If you have any questions during the presentation, please add them in the Q&A or chat window. There will be a 15 to 20-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation. There will also be some polling questions through the webinar, so please submit your answers. Today, our presentation is on investing during turbulent times. The world came to a standstill during the COVID-19 pandemic, as we're all aware. However, pension plans drastically changed during this time. There are many questions and concerns that you may have. Is my retirement still on track? Should I change my investments? Do I feel like I'm the same investor as last year? If you would like to know how the investment industry has responded and what you can do to keep your retirement plans on track, this webinar will help guide you to cutting out the noise and focusing on what's important in regards to your pension plans. Our presenters today are Roy Bluehorn, who's an account executive from Pension and Benefits, TIPI-IMI Insurance Partners, and Dion McKay, an account executive, Pension and Benefits from TP Insurance Partners. Dion is a Cree resident of Fisher River Cree Nation. He started with TP as an MSR and has now become a benefits consultant after having completed his LLQP, or Life License Qualification Program. When he isn't in the office, he is spending time with his family and children, and he's an avid basketball fan and plays in a spring summer league in Winnipeg with the Fisher River Hawks. Roy Bluehorn is a proud member of the Poundmaker Cree Nation and grew up in Saskatoon, where he also went to the University of Saskatchewan, majoring in political science. Roy has worked for the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, the House of Commons, as a political and policy advisor for the Premier of Ontario, the Saskatchewan Indian Gaming Authority, the Affinity Credit Union, and the Parole Board of Canada. Roy Bluehorn comes from a strong background in government relations and communications. He has worked for TP Insurance Partners for 5 years as an account executive, where he specializes in group benefits and group pensions. In addition to our two presenters, there will be also some other individuals who will answer some questions from the company. That would be Melissa Walterson, Christine Kessel, Alan Monroe, Eric Shearer, and Maureen Stewart. So I'll turn it over to you, Dion, to take it away. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Terry, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all staying safe and doing well this fine afternoon. We were asked to do a presentation on pension plans and talk to you a little bit about what's been going on in the industry, some best practices in terms of what you should do from this point going forward. And if you have any questions at all, just as Terry said, feel free to ask them in the Q&A section or the chat. If you think of anything after the fact, concluding this presentation and webinar, you can contact us and we'll be more than happy to help you out any way that we can. We do have a general email address, info@tppartners.com, which we will forward to any participants that want to know this information or ask any questions at the conclusion of this webinar. So we're going to jump right into the presentation now. So as Terry said, investing during turbulent times, obviously over this past couple of months, it's been quite the situation we've all been in due to COVID-19, and its effects have been pretty far-reaching for not just pension plans, but our daily lives, how we travel, how we commute, how we talk, how we visit each other. And investing in turbulent times can obviously be quite unsettling. But the rules of the game aren't different. The most important point that I want to stress to everyone is that this isn't a time to panic and that diversification is your friend. Professional portfolio managers are taking in the information, cutting out the noise, sticking to disciplined investment processes, continually assessing risk reward scenarios, and looking for opportunities for you as their clients. So in order to get started here, we wanted to talk a little bit about what pension plans are and predominantly how your pension plan currently exists. So I'll hand this off to Roy to talk about this slide.
All right, thank you. Majority of the plans that I have under in Saskatchewan are defined contribution plans, and that's what we're going to go over here. A defined contribution plan pools contributions both of the employer and the employee into the pension pool. The employer know the cost of such a plan. Sometimes it starts out at 3.5, and it's matched by the employer. It's often there's a choice. Sometimes 3, 5, 7. But the maximum amount, of course, per year is 18% of the year's earned income based on your own income. The total value of the pool of funds, there's various things that impact it, of course, and one of the key ones is the market. Also, one of the key factors is how you decide to, we'll get into that a little bit later, but how you decide to manage your portfolio. An employee with a defined contribution plan does not know how much he or she will receive as a pension, and the member is responsible to ensure that they have enough for retirement. So right here with this graph, we have, excuse me, sorry, the yellow and the gray box, the employer contributions, the employee contributions go into the retirement fund. And of course, there's a few factors in there that will result in the final box being your retirement income. And so there's some planning, and we'll get into that as well later on in that slideshow.
So just like any other scenario in life, there's pros and cons to anything, and there's we wanted to highlight some of the good things about defined contribution pension plans, as well as some of the cons to how defined contribution plans also work. On the pro side, unlike a defined benefit plan, you are in control of your money that is invested, and you decide how much to contribute to the plan and how to invest it. Now, like we said in the previous slides, how much is contributed to the plan is dependent on the plan design. So your employer might have, say, for example, a 5% matching pension. So where you are deducted 5% off your pay, your employer matches that 5%, and that goes in. On top of that, you can also voluntarily contribute to your pension. So 18% is the maximum that can be contributed to defined contribution plans. So if 10% is going in that's required, that means you have an additional 8% to voluntarily contribute to your pension as a member of that pension plan. Another pro is that if you leave the company or your organization, your money comes with you no matter how long you work there. So you own that, and you can move it where you see fit after your finished employment. And there's 3 factors that will determine the size of your retirement nest egg. One being the contributions going into the plan. 2, the investment growth on that plan. And number 3, how long your money has to grow during that time. These factors will determine your monthly income upon retirement. And as well, dollar cost averaging is also accomplished through payroll deductions, meaning that when the market is down, you're purchasing more units as the market continues to move along day by day. Right.
All right. With the next slide, we have we call them cons of the employee defined contribution plan. It's not really cons. It's just one of the some of the factors, I guess, that go into it. Market volatility is a big one. It's unknown how much money you'll have at the time of retirement. But we wanted to stress, this is one of the first things that we come up with, wanted to stress that market volatility is a short-term effect. And we got a couple slides coming up following this slide that kind of demonstrate that. Unlike defined benefit plans, retirement income isn't guaranteed. If the money is invested too conservatively, it may not grow fast enough to keep up with inflation. This is a conversation I have a lot with some of our clients. If you talk about, say, GICs or like, basically it may not keep up with inflation. The final balance of your retirement plan is based on the outcome of your invested contributions. Again, that's where the client has a little bit more control. They're able to go conservative, or anywhere from conservative all the way to aggressive. And it's largely based on your profile, your investment profile, largely based on your age, and of course based on the economy, right? And we're going through something right now that is challenging the way you think. So we'll go into the next slide. I just wanted to throw this up to this might be a good time to do the first poll question. Have you had the opportunity to work from home during the pandemic? So I don't know how this works, if they have a few moments to ponder this question, and then go back to the slide. One of the things that the first slide shows around, like, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's approximately 10 to 12 bear runs, I guess, since 1945. The following slide, it goes through 18, and it's a little bit more in detail. But the reason I wanted to show you this slide in particular is because of every time there's a bear market, like right now with the pandemic, we're a bit of a downturn. It's always followed with a I'm going to close this. Sorry, I can see it. It's always followed with a sharp rise, and it sometimes takes up to 2 years. If you look at this chart, it's very good. So the one you're looking at right now, stay invested to take advantage of the market recoveries. There's a few points we wanted to make on this one as well. As you can see, there's a few of them. A few of them are a little bit iffy. Like, I think 9/11, we didn't particularly have such a sharp downturn, but it definitely impacted the markets, as you probably remember. There's a few notes that I wanted to bring up here. So basically, right up until now, we've operated under a relatively steady set of economic conditions and assumptions, right? That housing and financial markets were stable, the economy continues to function, but now that's been challenged, right, with the pandemic. Your approach to retirement assumes that if retirement goes wrong, retirees have fallbacks to rescue their finances, right? One of them, of course, is returning to paid employment. If you're near retirement, you may take up a job to supplement your retirement. You may be able to access home equity. And a third one, of course, is accessing savings and RSPs, that kind of thing. So those are some of the ideal things that would happen in an ideal situation, but we're not in one necessarily right now. So I'll hand it back to Dion.
Yeah.
If you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's good, Roy. Just real quick on the polls there, 84% responded that yes, they've been working from home. 6% responded that they haven't been working from home, and 10% responded that they were somewhat, I guess, working from home and maybe going to the office periodically throughout the pandemic, the course of the pandemic, I should say. So continuing on, we also wanted to highlight, again, focusing on defined contribution plans, which the overall majority of us pay into, the type of options that you as members have under those pension plans. And we wanted to highlight a few scenarios here on what the typical member usually does once they enroll with their employer's pension plan. And one of them is the asset allocation funds. They're quite easy investments. They're very diversified portfolios. One thing I want to make sure that everybody knows is that under these asset allocation funds, think of them as a group of a fund of funds. And there's portfolio managers for every one of these different asset allocation profiles. So they mix vary according to your choice as an investor. Typically, we refer to them as target risk funds, which is at a level of risk that you're comfortable with. And these are kind of generalized terms. They might be termed differently under your pension carrier. but by and large, they range from conservative, moderate, increase into balanced, advanced, and aggressive asset allocation funds, each carrying their own levels of risk, of course, but also their own sets of funds that they have. So the member typically can complete a risk personality questionnaire to determine what risk profile they have and are as an investor. And this is just a general step that most advisors will take through with their clients, and that the member is comfortable with doing the questionnaire and choosing an asset allocation. It's a pretty simplified process, and the member then invests accordingly to their risk profile. Now we wanted to kind of show you a little bit of a graph here of how this typically works. So there's, like I said, there's an asset mix of these target risk asset allocation funds of equities versus fixed income. So on the conservative end, you can see more of your pension being invested in fixed income, 75% versus 25% in equities. Under the moderate, that slightly increases and decreases on the fixed income and equity side, balanced, right? And as we get more advanced, and then finally into the more aggressive end, the equity investments increase as you continue on in that graph. Go ahead, Roy.
Okay. With the lifestyle, next slide is life cycle fund. Try to explain that one a little bit. The diversified portfolio managed by professionals who rebalance your investments over time. Basically, it's one of the default for members. Like when you join a plan and you don't know necessarily what type of plan, like what kind of profile you have. Generally speaking, you're something in fairly moderate. Most of them are fairly moderate. If you were to refer to the last slide, something a little bit more balanced. With the life cycle fund though, and it varies, like from, we had our internal call yesterday, and work all across the board. Some have the life cycle fund already in place for some of their clients, and some of us don't. Again, this one, the life cycle fund, automatically more conservative as you get closer to retirement. Helps simplify your retirement investing decisions, and it's the most popular option as a default. So the next one, the next slide. Sorry, I'm not sure. Sorry if I'm cutting you off, Dion. It's basically it's a graph to basically to outline what it means as far as your equity and your fixed income. So. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you want to add with it, particularly to this slide, Dion?
Not a whole lot. Really, at the end of the day, when you think of life cycle, just to simplify it, essentially, the older the member becomes in that pension plan, the more conservative the investments become. The younger you are, the more aggressive, and the older you become, the more conservative. So that's just generally how it works. Typically, they're pooled in five-year pools to retirement, and it's just an automatic rebalancing and readjusting of your pension. So, in terms of the amount of work a plan member typically has to do on a pension plan is very, very minimal, and the portfolio managers just automatically readjust and rebalance your investments according to your age. Again, this is just another slide of how this gradual investment timeline works, right? Again, like I said, the younger a person is, the more aggressive the investments become on the equity side, and the older you get, the more invested into fixed income funds those investments change over time.
All right, I think right now we're kind of flying through here. Might be a good time to pull up one of our poll questions. The second one, I believe. This one in particular is very, I think is very, it's kind of timely. I think there's some additional questions that I wanted to ask with respect to this one, because like the pandemic, when it comes to retirement, is a fairly big game changer, right? And we have there's a few things. Like, I don't know how many of our participants on the call are actually near retirement or considering, or basically considering retirement. Employment opportunities, they basically dwindle. Job security isn't guaranteed, and a lot of you are finding that. And as well, like there's probably a lot of businesses that won't bounce back from this as well, right? So another one is, sorry, windows keep popping up on my notes here. Average age of retirement rises as well. So that's something as well. I joke with my wife that I may have to be working until I'm 90, right? So to match my old goals. So I think everyone's had to adjust somewhat. Another one is considering non-traditional work. And if you're able to secure some sort of, whether it's freelance or short-term type of employment to supplement your income, it often doesn't include pension options or job stability or even job security. You just don't know how long that will last. And there may not even be enough in that job for traditional savings. And of course, there's no access to employment insurance, and the employer contributions to Canada Pension Plan may have to solely come from yourself. So that's another thing, another huge factor when it comes to trying to secure saving money for the future. So I felt like that question is kind of timely.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that, Roy. We do have one question here. Well, we just got the poll results here. So have you been able to save money? 62% apps answered yes, 10% were able to answer no, and 28% answered somewhat. And so that gives us a good snapshot of where we're all at, and it kind of jives. I'm glad to hear that most people were able to save money, which is a good sign. All right, so I wanted to quickly just jump into it. There's a question here that was asked from Catherine. I'm going to butcher your last name, Catherine. I do apologize. Verhey. So the question is that it comes from the auditor. Employee pension matching. As this is a contribution to a group RRSP plan, this is a taxable benefit, which means there is CPP and EI on the amount, even if there is no tax. Contributions to a registered RRSP are different. Our organization is situated on reserved land, and this is the first I've heard of this. I need comments on how to deal with this. So the first thing is, I guess to kind of answer some of that, what you just brought up, whether or not your members are status, for example, and whether this reserve status also includes tax exemption. One of the first things I would bring up is that for the status members that you have situated on reserve, who are also contributing to the plan, maybe shouldn't be contributing to an RRSP, because any amounts that do go into an RRSP is a tax sheltered vehicle for savings. But when withdrawals are made on an RRSP, that income from that RRSP is subject to taxation, and therefore the contribution is not deductible. So I would maybe question what type of plan you're currently in. If you have any questions after this, Catherine, maybe we can connect and we can walk you through some of the how your pension plan is currently set up. Typically most pension plans on reserve are registered pension plans, RPPs, and if we have status members that are contributing to the RPP, it's non-taxable, and when that member retires and withdraws on that registered pension plan, that income, that retirement income, is also tax exempt. So that's one important key. Just want to make sure that we're stressing here. Again, I'm not too sure if you're located on a reserve that has tax exemption, but that would be one key point there. All right, moving on. This slide here, just staying on the topic of life cycle funds, just shows you the exposure to equities versus fixed income assets. Again, just following the investor's age, the younger you are, the more higher in equities your investments are. The closer you become to retirement, the less risk, the more conservative. And obviously, the more conservative means more predictability so that the member can enjoy their retirement and with fair confidence that their income is going to be fairly consistent. So now we get on the topic of the pandemic, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this presentation, and everyone's had some questions. We've definitely been asked more than a few questions from our clients and our members that we service. You know, and we all know that global stock markets experienced sharp and in some cases historic declines at the end of February in reaction to this outbreak and its potential to wreak havoc on the global economy. In the final week of the month of March 2020, investors fled risk-on assessments such as equities and commodities and turned primarily to the most conservative investment approaches, specifically cash, sovereign debt, and fixed income. The speed, scope, and shockwaves of the virus spread was matched in the capital markets. Equity markets in particular around the globe suffered dramatic losses in the first quarter of 2020, and the volatility was quite extreme. However, when we do get to April, global equity and bond markets rebounded strongly, primarily in response to central banks and government stimulus programs that were announced during this pandemic. We all know that with the oil prices essentially plummeting as demand hit a virtual wall with all of the shutdowns and the reduced travel and reduced production in major industries, it's definitely taken a hit. In spite of that, bond yields had stabilized. Governments began to unveil post-pandemic plans to emerge from shutdowns and offered a glimpse of what new normal realities will happen. So April offered strong gains for the global equity and bond markets. And again, this was driven by fiscal and monetary stimulus packages and the apparent slowing of the spread of COVID-19. The one point I want to make on the last bullet there is, stimulus programs such as the CERB benefit for people, the small business program announcements that the federal government as well as provincial governments have made to help those in need and to keep the economy still moving along have definitely helped. And of course, with that last statement, obviously right now it appears like the spread of COVID-19 is reducing in a lot of regions. That being said, we don't know what's going to be happening in the next couple weeks or the next couple months. Things can obviously change during that time, and just as much as there's been swings on either side of investments, we could be experiencing more of that to come potentially. This graph here just gives you a quick snapshot of one, how the S&P has functioned over the past year, just to give you a point of view of how a general stock looks. And from April 2019, you can see where the levels were at, and throughout pretty much the entire year of 2019, there was a pretty good sized bull run, right? And funds had received returns that were pretty prominent. And then of course, when the pandemic hit near the tail end of February, they took a bit of a nosedive. But then, as you can see, back up again in the month of April, just this year, you can see those levels kind of leveling back out to what last year's levels were at least closely to.
Okay, now would probably be a good time to let's jump to poll question 5 if we can. We're kind of flying through here, so. Have your monthly expenses increased or decreased? And I'm gonna go off, I know we have this slide here, but I'm going to kind of go off track because there's a few points I want to make that are in particular answer the topic at hand. Should I change my investments? Adapting to less certainty, that's a big thing right now, right? Reevaluating your current financial position. rethinking your risk. One of the things, one of my colleagues here, she does a presentation, Christina, you may have heard her name mentioned here. She does a presentation, and in the presentation, there's one key graphic that always generates a lot of conversation, and that is the average Canadian is living in retirement on 67% of their pre-retirement income. And we were guys doing the math this morning with my wife, and we were like shaking our heads at how tough that would be. Like it would be like, but I mean, having said that, there's a few pre-existing conditions, and I'll go through a couple of them. One of them, of course, being is the assumption being that maybe you paid off your mortgage by then, maybe your children have moved out of the house, you don't have those expenses, and you've obviously adjusted some of your living discretionary spending by then. So, but having said it, it's difficult to see today, right? When you take your net pay and times it by 67%, it's tough. It's a tough thing. So there's a couple more points I want to make with that, with respect to the question, should I change my investments? There's market volatility. I'm just gonna shut this. There's risk that stocks could fall further, right? There's that. But there's also risk that selling now means an investor may not make up their losses when stocks recover. Before deciding how to react to COVID-19, I think it's important to consider the math, some of the math behind the stock market declines, and of course consider that it always is followed by an upswing. There's a few quotes in my notes here that I liked that I read yesterday, and one of the quotes I read the other day, it's not the things that you buy and sell that make you money, it's the things that you hold. Holding during a bull market is difficult because you're always worried when the music is going to stop, right? And holding during a bear market is always difficult because you never know how bad things can get. And that's a key conversation I have with a lot of our clients, is trying to address the concerns on how low is it going to go? Should I just unlock now? Should I consider retirement now? And should I, change into some sort of adjust some of my options? And it's a really, really big one. One last point with respect, and like I said, I know I went off track with this slide in particular. You consider, and you go back to those slides we showed you with the graphs with the up and downs. If you're 25 years old right now, there's going to be anywhere from 5 to 7 more pandemic-like type of dips in your lifetime. So it's something to consider, right? That short-term pain, I always say that short-term pain versus long-term gain, that's a big one, right? And as you're kind of gathering from my talking in the last couple minutes here, I'm a strong believer that you have to hold, and it doesn't work for everybody, but that's my big thing is basically, experiencing the short-term pain and just hanging tight, hanging in there. And I think that's a big one. And I know, like I said, we're running a little bit short of time here. Can we throw up number 6, poll question number 6? Is that possible? Since the pandemic was first announced, have you gone online and changed the type of investor you are? That one interests me a lot, so I'm looking forward to your answers on that one. With that, I'll pass it off to Dion.
Right. Okay, thanks, Ray. Just some comments too on this pandemic that we generally wanted to get out to those that are viewing this webinar right now. In spite of all this stuff that's been happening in the world and in the markets, there's still reason for optimism. We do caution that much remains unknown in terms of how long, and how severe the economic impacts will last. At best, we're merely at the start of any such recovery taking hold. The right approach to reopening economies will obviously be determined only in hindsight, and timing is crucial. Reopen economies too quickly, and scientists point to the very real risk of a reoccurring surge in the spread of the virus. Hold back too long, and the economic hardship might overwhelm otherwise healthy businesses. And unlike many past market events, we expect medical news to take precedent over business pundits in determining how markets respond. Capitalism never wins over the power of human nature, especially when it comes to the basic security of one's own health. Before any of us ever contemplated the value of a dollar, we knew it was bad to be sick. And human nature always has a way of helping mankind to get our priorities straight. So we got our results from the sixth poll question. Since the pandemic was first announced, have you gone online and changed the type of investor you are? 7% said yes, 93% said no. And so that, that gives us a good outline of where people are at least those that are on the webinar right now. So thank you for that, for sharing those answers with us. So we'll just continue on in the slides here. What to do now? For those using balanced and asset allocation funds, your solutions are already designed for this type of market volatility, i.e. they're pretty much automatic. High quality fixed income assets are delivering a substantial positive performance to offset to equity market declines. And by construct, your portfolios will increase exposure to capital markets that are beaten down and lighten up on the safer assets such as bonds, which are in their portfolio for exactly these kinds of situations. One other point we want to make sure that everyone's aware of, for those investors who are not in automatically rebalancing environments for their portfolios, we encourage you to proactively rebalance and stay the course with your long-term plans. In addition to the asset allocation funds and the life cycle funds that we explained earlier, there is typically a small amount of members in a pension plan who choose their own investments. The pension plan could afford members the option to invest in strictly equities, strictly bonds, however they see fit, depending on the products that they make available. So for those members that are in that type of situation, generally, if you're making those type of investment decisions on your own, generally those people are also keeping track of how the markets are performing. The hope is that for members that are in that situation, that you're monitoring it and that you're making changes that still matches your long-term goals. Right, and that's pretty much it. What we'd like to do is talk about some of or open it up for Q&A. If any members on the webinar wanted to ask questions now, feel free to do so. We do have one question here that was asked from Daryl Quendent. And the question is, are you required by law to adjust your pension separate from your pension rep? So there's a couple things with that particular question. If we're talking about this question from a member's perspective, any member can change their investments anytime that they want without having to go to their pension rep if they don't want to. Typically, most pension carriers will allow members the option to go online to view their account and as well as to make any changes to their investments. So if you're in a life cycle fund, you can switch over to an asset allocation that's conservative or balanced or aggressive, or choose very specific funds that they may offer under your group pension plan. So there's no requirement by law to adjust your pension with your pension rep. That being said, it is good practice to at least talk to someone. If not your pension rep, you can also talk to representatives at the pension carrier that your pension plan is under to get some advice. Now, if we're talking from an employer's perspective, if they're required by law to adjust, if they want to make pension adjustments separate from their pension rep, a group can adjust how much contributions they're required to make, both for themselves and for the employee. That's done by way of an amendment to the group pension plan. So, during these times, obviously, we know that with a lot of our communities being isolated and choosing to close their borders to non-essential activities, that's, impacted businesses, right? And, we've heard of a lot of layoffs that have occurred because of this pandemic. So with decreased activity means decrease in revenue for those communities. So, there's definitely been a bit of a cash crunch that we've heard of from some of our groups. So what some employers could do, if they so choose to do so, is to reduce the requirements for contributions to the pension plan by form of an amendment. The employer would need to inform the employee typically within, I would say, 30 days of any changes to the pension plan. So for example, if your community has a 5% contribution scale where the employee contributes 5 and the employer contributes 5, the employer can decide to amend the pension plan to reduce it to something, say at 1%, 1% employee match, 1% employer match. They can amend that if they felt they needed to adjust their budgets. But again, it has to be done legally through an amendment to the pension plan, and they need to notify their employees of any changes that they may make in that regard. So Daryl, I hope I answered your question clear enough there. Again, if you do have any questions on this particular question, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do the best that we can to help you out in answering that question.
Okay, so anybody have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll be, the two, Dion and Roy and company will be able to answer those questions. But in the meantime, I just want to pick up on one question that Kathy said. So there's in Kathy's question there about that Dion mentioned, there's a lot of issues that are wrapped up into that question. You're talking, and I think the best way to separate them is you talk about EI first, right? Because EI you're gonna have to pay, right? That's employment insurance. Then you get to CPP. So on CPP, it depends. There's a lot of depends in this. So some communities will contribute to CPP, so they have that as part of their plan, and some don't. But it has to be a group decision in terms of the CPP for on reserve there. I've always said that we should be ensuring that CPP is done, because at the back end, when you're retirement, that's something that you need as well, in addition to your into your portfolio. Then we get to the issue of the pension, right? And as Dion and Roy have talked about, there's a difference between the RPP and the RRSP. So, and what it is this, right? So if the First Nation person is tax exempt, you don't want to ever be an RRSP, because that's really a tax deferral program. And if you contributed to it, your tax exempt income is not considered earned income by CRA standards. So if you contributed to it, you're going to be over contributed, and then you get a penalty on that, right? And that's why there's a registered pension plan, an RPP, for typically for First Nation people, right? Rather than the RRSP. So as Dion and Roy have mentioned, if you're you're in a community that's on reserve and your First Nation people are in an RSP, you want to be moving them from that, and you're moving them into a registered pension plan, an RPP. And then comes all the wonderful stuff that Dion and Roy have mentioned. Okay, so just picking up on some of the stuff, the one thing that always had interested me is the management fees that are charged on any pension plan. So I'd just like you guys to comment on a couple of things with them. Number one is what should be a reasonable management fee? Because you got to expect your the people managing your investments don't do this for free, right? They do this for they're specialists in this industry, so you certainly relying on their advice. So what do you think is a reasonable management fee for this that the an employee pays in their pension? And then the second thing is what can we expect for that management fee in addition to sort of the investments, like in terms of your advice or meeting with us, or so just if you could just ask you guys to comment on that.
Right on. Well, okay, well, thanks for that question, Terry, and I'll do the best that I can to answer. So the first question, what are typical reasonable fees to a pension plan? There are different facets to how a pension plan is charged. Most pension plans that you see out there in the First Nation market are retail pension plans, where every group or every community has their own pension plan, and they're charged a fee for the management of that. Now, there's three components that makes up the administration of that pension. There's a trust arm manages the flow of funds. So when contributions are made, the trust arm makes sure that the payments are made and are added to the pension for those individual members. There's also the administration arm, which oversees the administration of the plan. So making sure that the reporting is done, statements, online information is kept up to date. And then there's your investment arm, where you have your portfolio managers investing that pension according to the members' wishes. And those are the three components. On top of that, there's also the commission that is paid out to the brokers for assisting the clients with any decisions, making changes, educating and informing the plan and its members. So on a retail end, you can see the gamut. They can cost anywhere from 1.4, 1.5% and up. Some retail plans we've seen, can go as high as 2% or 2.1, 2.2%. I'm going to make a little bit of a shameless plug here, but TIPI Insurance does have a pension plan, and our investment management fee is 1.25%, which is in our neck of the woods with our specialty, we refer to that as a institutional rate, whereby we leveraged our size as a group with the First Nations clients that we service and got a 1.25%. And as we continue to grow, that fee will continue to drop as we take on more clients who opt into our pension plan. So, Terry, it like I said, it runs the gamut. Ours under our pension plan is 1.25%, and that's across the board. It doesn't matter if a person is they're in a conservative asset allocation fund up to an aggressive asset allocation fund. It's the same fee, regardless of age. You can be a younger person in a life cycle fund or an older person in a life cycle fund. It's the same. We treat everyone equally under our pension plan, but under retail pension plans, those fees will differ depending on the asset allocation, will depend on the life cycle fund, and will depend on whether we have those individuals who invest on individual funds within their pension plan. So they can vary greatly amongst pensions and its members. So for myself, my personal opinion is 1.25% is obviously better than paying a 1.5 or 2%. So when we talk about the growth of a member's pension, those fees are going to have an absolute impact on what type of returns a member gets. So one thing those that are in attendance here for the webinar want to check is to see what your investment management fees are on your statements. As well, you should be able to see what your investment management fees are if you log online to your pension carrier site. You should be able to see what your fees are. And so, right off the hop, at least for us, we're upfront with our fees, and all our members know exactly what they're being charged. Roy, is there anything you want to add on to that?
No, you hit the nail on the head, actually. So, good job.
All right, I'll ask you one more question, you guys, because I've always been curious about this. You talked a little bit about matching, right? And you actually threw out a number of different percentages, 3%, 5%, whatever, right? So given you guys are in this industry, because I've always been interested in this, which is what is the average matching percentage? And if you're going to do a 3, 5, whatever, right? Where do you think it should be, for I guess for staff members to ensure that they have a reasonable pension when they retire?
There's probably a couple things with that, Terry. The first thing the employer wants to obviously look at is their budget constraints, right? They want to make sure that they can afford to contribute to a pension for their employees. So that really should be the first thing that employers are looking at is, can we afford this, and how much can we afford? If they can meet a certain requirement to match, then that's great. For myself, with the client base that I typically service, on the average, 5% is the typical deduction rate that I typically see for most plans. So the employer contributes 5%, and the employee is matched at 5% going in. If my own employer is listening to this, ideally they're contributing 9%, and then I get deducted 9%, so the full 18% is maxed out. From an employee's perspective, that's golden. Any amount that my employer is willing to contribute is great, and if they can max out their contributions, then I'm happy as an employee. So I think running it back though to the beginning of this answer, it's going to be up to the employer to determine from a budget perspective how much they can contribute. Again, on the average, 5% is what I see at least. Roy can pop on in here and add anything else, but 5% and 5%, 10% going in. The maximum contribution is 18%, don't forget. So the member can voluntarily contribute an additional 8% on their own if they wanted to. So, and the member too has to make that choice at that point too, based on their own personal budgets, if they can afford to make any voluntary contributions to their pension.
And how do you guys? I know I said last question, but I'm curious about this. How do you guys recommend to harmonize CPP and sort of group insurance in terms of the percentages?
That's a question I don't know the answer to. Like the one that we have is the one that I've noticed, not so much harmonizing. Like it's tough in Saskatchewan, right? It's tough to find someone in Saskatchewan that hasn't worked at SIGA, right? Like there's lots of, you go on reserve, you go some of these a lot of our clients, and there's always someone in the room, up to 10 people in the room who have worked at SIGA. And one of the things that they offered at SIGA was they called it a First Nation pension plan, and it was done in lieu of because they didn't make contributions for status employees that did not make contributions to Canada pension plans. So they called it the First Nation pension plan, and it was done to basically be on par so that they're offering the same benefit to all their employees, right, as their non-status employees. They collect the CPP, of course, for the non-status. And it was 3%. And I don't necessarily know how they got the number 3%. And it was matching, but there was also non-registered. That was the difference as well. So, and it has to be vested. It had to be in there for 2 years to enable to keep the employer's portion. So the reason I bring that up is because it always comes up at a lot of meetings I go to. People ask if, like, since we don't pay Canada pension plan, is this something? And that's more of an internal discussion that the employer has to have with their employees. And I try not to weigh in too much, only because they may not have the budget for it. That's the big one. They may not be in their budgeting to offer something like that to their employees. Again, I don't know if any one of my colleagues want to jump in with respect. I don't know where they got 3% from necessarily, but it's something that's popular in Saskatchewan with employees, of course, because it's an additional thing to add to their retirement, right? But as you will note, though, it's not registered. It's a non-registered plan. So, in fact, a lot of employees, once they conclude working with SIGA, they access the money. So it's not necessarily, but it's an additional option. You can't tell people what you do, I suppose.
Okay. Thanks, Roy. I know Marion Brass-Yellowfly has a quick question. I don't know if you guys can answer it or not, but maybe very quickly you can answer it.
Yeah,
which,
absolutely. They're on the general level. There's no real changes aside from the fact that OSFI has extended the annual information return reports. They've extended the deadline to September 30th of this year. So, right around this time is typically when we would have those AIRs submitted. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they have extended the deadline to September 30th for the AIR reports to be made.
okay.
As well. There's one more question here, Terry, from Sandra that was asked. And this is the question. I have heard a myth that if living on a reserve, that pensions are a given. My question is, what kind of grassroots information can you provide to bring information regarding pensions to those who are in the workforce or just entering the workforce? She says, I know pensions are important, so as an advocate of future planning, I would like to be able to provide accurate information. So in regards to the myth itself that by living on a reserve pensions are given, that's not typically true. I mean, as Canadians, we have access to old age security, guaranteed income supplement if you qualify, and if the community itself or the employees at least pays into CPP, may also have access to this Canada pension plan. But outside of that, pensions aren't a given on a reserve. If a person living on reserve works for an employer that does have a pension plan, then obviously they pay into it, and they have a return on that, and they retire on whatever amount is that they've been paying into it. So for any new employees and new members that are coming on to a pension plan, education is obviously key. And the earlier members know, what their role is in the pension plan, the better off they're going to be. The younger a person starts working and paying into a pension plan, obviously, the better their retirement will become. The longer that you can contribute to a pension plan, the better it is going to be for that individual. So again, just education is going to be key, making sure that employee knows how the plan works, what their options are under the pension plan, and just making sure that they understand that, as Roy had alluded to in the presentation, it is a bit of a long game when it comes to investments. So don't think short term, think long term game.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank our presenters from TIPI-IMI Insurance Partners. Thank you, Dion. Thank you, Roy, and our participants for registering for today's live webinar. The recordings and slides will be added to our webinar page at www.AFOA.ca. Please fill out the survey, which will appear after the webinar, and please join us for next week's webinar. We're going to try to get somebody to reflect more of the month that we're in, which is the Indigenous History Month. So look forward to seeing that. I'd like to mention that AFOA Canada is launching its Certified Indigenous Human Resource Professional Program, and the first session by virtual in a virtual setting will be held July 17th to the 19th. And remember, if you register and attend 3 of our webinars in the current series, you are entered to win a prize. So thank you to everyone who attended this session, and we look forward to your attendance next week, same day and time. Bye for now.